Why should it be a racist thing to point out something that is statistically true? And why is the safety of women and girls not paramount? I don't want children watching porn. I'm unhappy about children being exposed to social media. I don't want children being able to take puberty blockers. Men and women are fucking fundamentally different. They always will be. And men can't be women.
Should Shamima Begum be allowed back into the UK?
Yeah.
I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsors, Gold Seal. I use their products every single day, and now I finally get to work with them. I use their products for anti-inflammatory, reduced anxiety, better sleep, and mental clarity. I'm going to put a link to their website in the description, along with a 10% discount code for you to take advantage of. Go and have a look at their website, see if there's anything in there for you. I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and good health. Alex.
I've got really dry hands, sorry.
I won't hold it against you.
Winter.
Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
I obviously follow you on X and watch what you do on Talk TV. And for a long time, I have thought, what an important voice for women. And you go where others fear to tread. But before we get into that,
okay.
Former MEP, fearless broadcaster, journalist, you've done some incredible work along the way. But I want to know, before we start getting to current affairs and start putting the country to rights, I'd love to find out more about you, going right back to the beginning, like where you're from, your childhood, what moulded your political mind, what inspired you. And let's get under the bonnet of Alex Phillips.
All right, let's try.
Where did it all begin?
Okay, so I'm born and brought up in Gloucester. My parents still live in the same house. It's like a 1970s housing estate. Very normal, you know, a sort of place where you have the RAC van driver, and my dad's a lorry driver, clerical, you know, just sort of middle Britain, really. So I was almost born in that house with my mum and my biological father, who'd moved to Gloucester because my biological father just got a job there. Anyway, you can tell by me saying biological father that he's not in the picture. Then went, yeah. He left my mum. Gosh, I was a baby. I have really no memory of him. So, yeah, I mean, my mum remarried when I was 5 years old to the man I called Dad. He is Dad, because he's been around for as long as I can remember, who is a lorry driver. And his daughter and my brother were in the same class at reception at school, because my dad's got a girl that was basically sort of, he brought her up single-handedly. Her mother was kind of out of the picture for a lot of her life. And so it was at parents' evening where my dad was coming about Sally and my mum was coming about my brother Jonathan. They were in the same class. And they got together.
How about that?
Yeah, how about that? I remember in my childhood there being a lot of financial struggles, lots of money struggles, which created at times a tense atmosphere in the house. I think also when you have, it's very easy to go happily ever after. They met and the families were put together, and wasn't it? No, there's always tensions when you try and bring together, especially two different groups of children. I think, you know, a girl who was used to having just her dad in her life, and a brother and sister who were used to having just their mum. And then my dad worked away, you know, he was only home at weekends. And so there was, I suppose, volatility.
Arguments.
They argued, yeah. And
just verbally?
Yeah, just verbally. But my mum and my stepsister just didn't see eye to eye for such a long time. There was a huge amount of tension there. Things are resolved now. Things are extremely different now. But and at one point, so rolling the clock forward, when my stepsister was about 13, 14, her mother reappeared back on the scene. And her mother, late mother now, is a New Age traveller. Who lived in a place called Teepee Valley in Carnarvonshire. And she came back and wanted Sally to, you know, have a relationship with her. So Sally at weekends used to go and stay with her mum at Teepee Valley, which was a sort of slightly crazy environment. And I remember sort of as kids at weekends, we'd go and, because we were still quite young, so Jonathan and I would get in the car as we all drove down to drop her off and drove down to pick her up. And I can remember as a kid, you know, seeing her life running around with people with names like Geronimo and Typhoon, let's say, and all living in sort of teepees, actual teepees with these fires in the middle, and everyone being like, ooh, and thinking, this is so cool. I'd love to also live here. But I don't think it was the most sort of stable of background. So, really interesting complexion. My sister's black, by the way, so her mother's black. So my sister is a mixed race. And so just a very sort of, I've seen things from so many different angles. We had financial struggles at home. My brother and I were encouraged to go and get jobs from the age of 14, delivering papers and working at the local supermarket in order that we could save up that money to pay for driving lessons and get our first car. That's the only way those things would have been facilitated. I can remember as a kid having to sit out on certain school trips because we just wouldn't be able to afford it. So, I've lived a life. And then before I end up at Durham University, which probably has the highest ratio of people from private school there. And so at one point I'm working in the nightclubs of Gloucester, making cocktails for sort of small-time gangsters. And hearing the tales of, this barmaid's been sleeping with this doorman and then his girlfriend got jealous and put a firebomb through the letterbox and, all that sort of chaos. Then I go to university during the holidays and I'm serving champagne to the progeny of European royalty. And so it's sort of like, I've always had a foot in both camps.
What was your achievements at school, or what did you want to become?
Oh, school was easy for me. I loved school. I went to grammar school. I think grammar school is really important. There's very few places that have grammar schools now, but because I'm academically astute, my parents are both incredibly intelligent. My dad's probably one of the only sort of lorry drivers in the United Kingdom who can do the Times cryptic crossword in, a matter of hours and can understands Latin and speaks French fluently and is, extremely, extremely well educated. And my mum is, extraordinarily bright. And both of them were always quite insistent. There's a lot of at-home learning. Not like, sit down, get out your books and, not like Tiger Mum style, but we'd always have animated conversations around the dinner table. And so it was just sort of knowledge and learning was ingrained in me from a young age. Then I passed my GA4. I go to a grammar school, an all-girls grammar school. I then moved to the all-boys grammar school for sixth form and I get, A grades. So I go to a really good university. Ironically, I applied to Oxford, right? And Oxford turned me down on the basis that you have to send a letter to your sixth form, sort of saying why. And I can't remember the exact words, but it was along the lines of my attitude and my attire were not fitting of the institution, because I turned up for my Oxford interview in like jeans and little heeled ankle boots and a fluffy jumper. Everyone else is turning up with their like little Eton uniforms and their boaters. And I'm like, okay, all right. And I did apply to a college at Oxford, which had the reputation of being the most sort of posh and public school driven, who were trying to make an effort to get more working class people. So that's why more people from state school. So that's why my school said, you should go and apply to this one. They're really looking for people from state schools. So I go and apply, and basically the letter said, because you're from a state school, you're not getting in. But good, I ended up at Durham, which I loved. That's actually the university where my stepdad's grandfather lectured.
I suspect that you've got a few wild tales.
Oh, I was massively wild at university.
If you don't mind sharing them.
I was so wild at university. God, I loved my degree. I did philosophy and literature. And I loved going to lectures. But we only had, when you do the arts, you only have about 6 lectures a week. So it's not like 1 hour, 6 1-hour lectures a week. So it's not hard in a space of a week to manage to do those things. And in the medium time, you're supposed to be getting out books from the library and doing all the reading. But I lived, there used to be this nightclub in Durham called Clute, which is owned by Dominic Cummings' family. The Cummings of Durham owned Clute. It's shut now, apparently. This little trashy, sticky floored nightclub. God, I used to have like on with permanent marker this watch I drew on my wrist that said Clute o'clock, because every night was Clute o'clock. And we'd just be in there all the time. It's just like, I don't know. We had a lot of fun.
It's amazing how many smart people come out of university considering they absolutely tap their brain with booze and substances.
Yeah, I mean, we partied really hard. But then at the same time, I'd always, like I said, go to my lectures. And I always knew at a certain point it's a cut-off point because the exams are coming, or it's a cut-off point because you've got to get this essay in. And I'm quite lucky, actually, that I can sort of go, all right, exams in a week, I better, pack it in and work now. And within a week, I don't know how, I can just absorb everything over the course of a whole year to a level that I can go into an exam and just like Johnny Five. And I appreciate that other people actually have to work a lot harder than that. That sounds immodest and precocious, but it's true. I'm just able to absorb information and and analyse it. I can't add up for shit though, right? My maths is terrible. And so I've always thought that actually people who are good at mathematics are the people who are genuinely clever. People like me just have very sort of fast, big processes in their brain that's able to deal with information. But when it comes to arithmetic, those bits of my brain are sort of necrotizing.
Any ADHD in there?
I think everyone goes around thinking they've got ADHD. I don't know. I don't really believe in these prognoses, really. So I'm going to go no. I think I'm bright. And I think when people are bright, they have brains that sort of open on multiple levels of tabs. I do find it hard to unwind. I do usually find that, I need to sort of have a whole process before I go to bed, before I can sleep. I can't just be like, come in from work. All right, better go to bed now.
Switch off time.
Yeah, I need to have a sort of ritualistic run up to make sure that all the sort of engines are being closed down. So maybe there is some element, but I think in this day and age, people are too quick to sort of dig out an acronym, PTSD, ADHD, whatever it may be.
I only ask you that because I know the older I've got, the more I've looked into my own mind, and it's chaos up there.
I think people think they're unique in the way that their minds function, how many thoughts a minute they have, and the sort of anxieties they have, and the sort of way they approach life or deal with life. Most people are pretty much, on some scale or the other, exactly the same, and they think they're unique in this. I think when people genuinely do have an acronym, there will be a marked difference between you and the person you're sitting opposite in the way that you experience the world. Otherwise, everything else is sort of some form of a grayscale. So do I think I've got ADHD? Probably not. If I did some sort of test, someone would probably find somewhere I could be borderline, but everyone's borderline everything, So I think it's almost become a desirable thing for people to say, I've got
something
ADHD. What's the one that a while ago the trend was? What's the one where people turn light switches on and off 1,000 times?
Oh, OCD.
OCD. That one used to be really popular for a while. Do you remember when everyone said, I really like my desk organised and I've got to have all my, cans in my kitchen cupboard facing forward. I've got OCD. It's like, no, you just like things being organised.
You're just tired.
If you spend the whole day in a nervous sweat and have to go back to your house 5 times to make sure your baked bean can's facing forward, you've got OCD. Unless it's completely destroying your life and making you go a bit wonky and it's affecting you and overwhelming you obsessively, you're just tidy, right? And so this is what I kind of think when people go, I've got ADHD. It's like, no, you just got a very active brain. Most people do. I'd imagine a lot of people are in the same boat.
That's a good answer, that is, for people that are wondering if they've got ADHD or if they think it's a bad thing to have an active brain. You've put them in good stead there. So
much of the world today is geared up to almost make people feel like this. So previously, when you think we used to have 1, 2, 3, then 4 legacy TV channels. So all you had to do in the evening was watch one of those. No internet, no handsets. So you got in from school like I did and you'd watch Newsround, Blue Peter, Neighbours, sit and do your homework, have tea with your family and then go play on the Super Nintendo with your big brother. Now people will sit there and have all the Netflix series, all the Amazon Prime series, Disney Plus, Paramount.
It's too much.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter,
Too much.
And what's more, when you go on the social media sites, all these little thumbnails, people spend about 10 seconds looking at something, they're on to the next, they're on to the next, they're on to the next. So instead of just sitting there and sort of passively imbibing one thing as your form of entertainment, everything is like a scattergun, like bah, 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 pelting you all the time with informations and options. And I find now that, if I want to go watch something on Netflix, I spend about half an hour going through Netflix to try and decide what I want to watch.
What,
and
the
then
thumbnails?
Don't want anything.
Yes, same as me.
Because there's too much. It's too much. You can't make a decision. And the problem with the 21st century, and one of the reasons I think everyone's so fucked up in the head, is instant gratification. Too much choice. Too much being thrown at you, too much to have to engage with or manage or choose between or prioritise. And also this sense that there's no struggle anymore. There's no reward. So if you look at things neurologically, when your neural pathways are triggered and you have that sort of waiting for something and then the joy of attaining it or receiving it, when this becomes increasingly instantaneous, that the net effect it has on your sense of well-being is diminished. So when we were growing up and you'd watch The Bill, let's say, you'd look forward to watching an episode of The Bill and it was, half hour long, an hour long. You knew all the characters and That was your reward and that was it. And you had a real sense of enjoyment about sitting down and watching it. And everyone was watching the same thing. So you go to school the next day and say, what did you see last night's bill? Now we're all atomised because no one's doing the same things at the same time. There's no sort of schedule. There's no charts to listen to on the radio and what's the number one record. You know, there's nothing that we all get together and congregate around culturally anymore. And at the same time, there's so much out there that we don't even have stuff for ourselves. We sort of find it increasingly hard to identify with our own patterns and habits, which is why, again, all of this sort of leads towards this identitarianism, people feeling like actually they're alone in the world because they're actually surrounded by too much stuff. And I could bang on about instant gratification from food and ultra-processed food to dating apps to, you know, it's contributing to the biggest explosion of mental health. That's, to me, what's at the root cause of it. You go to northern Kenya and see the tribes there who literally just have a mud hut. And they're happy as Larry. They're far happier than some teenager in the West who has got, you know, when you think about it, logically, everything at their fingertips, every opportunity, every technological device, every single comfort. They're the fucked up ones. The kid growing up in, you know, agrarian Africa is probably a lot happier.
Well, you and me grew up same time, same era.
Yeah.
We were playing in the street, playing in the park, actually connecting with human beings.
Playing Kirby. Did you have Kirby?
I was the best at Kirby. That's the only thing I was good at, but I was really fucking good at Kirby. Yeah. And in fact, I would still go and play Kirby now. I mean,
oh my God, can we play Kirby after this?
100%. I loved it. But we are where we are now. Our headspace and the way we view the world is the way it is because of how we were moulded. And I think the youngsters nowadays that are literally frying their brains on TikTok is a slot machine. It's like an adult junkie being in Vegas. So it's a social experiment. And in 20 years' time, how is that brain, how are brains going to start forming themselves down the line?
They're not forming themselves. And the problem is with this sort of atomization or avatarization of human beings through this sort of, huge propagation of digital technologies. It's bad enough when it's just someone flicking through content and sort of not really settling or resting on anything, constant overstimulation from the screen. When you feed into that, the toxic political content that goes in and the algorithms pushing people into echo chambers and some of the narratives being fed to people, BLM, trans, all of that, you feed that shit into that system. Then you feed in adult content, pornography into that system. You're rendering people into no longer even being human. All of their, you know, your capabilities, your instincts, your sort of inbuilt God-given biological frameworks of humanity, it should be your first port of call. You shouldn't be sort of wired into a main board that wants to reprogram you in a really dangerous direction. We're being told to ignore our gut instincts all the time, you know, especially when it comes to the concepts of prejudice. You know, if I think of young women in this context, they're being told, first of all, that empowerment and freedom is hypersexualization, that it's far better to be a Kardashian. You can make money from being an influencer. And so you don't have to develop anything human. You don't have to develop a real sort of strong personality. You don't have to develop skills, talents, a real offering to society. Instead, all you have to do is be an avatar. You have to be a collection of body parts and orifices to delight the male gaze. And that's it. You can make loads of money and that's empowering. That's dehumanizing. You know, that you're not being rounded. You're not being turned into a complete human being. And this is happening across all Western societies. You know, there's a brilliant psychologist called Jonathan Haidt who's talked about how mobile phones are affecting kids. And he's saying that when kids used to go out and play, that's where you learn diplomacy, negotiations, you learn to get injured, you learn to help someone who's injured, you row, you make up, you're outside in nature, you're connecting with the world around you. When you take that away from kids and replace it with an artificial, overstimulating, you know, world, virtual existence, these plastic brains that are supposed to be developing those skills that are going to be vital in adulthood, and especially coping mechanisms and strategies, they're not happening. And so you look at teenagers today and their nervous wrecks, They're absolutely nervous wrecks. You know, Australia's just taken the decision to ban social media for 16-year-olds. I mean, for anyone under 16, I kind of think, well, we've got to actually now. The attitude in Silicon Valley has always been move fast and break things. We've broken a whole generation. I think we've got to overreach now. We've got to overcorrect. We've got to say, okay, what is the impact assessment? How is this affecting minds, not just of young people? You know, people kind of talk as if you get to 18 and that's it. Your brain is a fixed thing and you're not going to be influenced or be able to, be warped by these things anymore, that you've got enough resilience. But that's just not true. Even I found during the riots when, people were going to prison for social media posts and I was having to go to work every day and I was sort of, 3 hours a day speaking live on these topics. And at the same time, you got all this sort of mob with their placards, we're going to stamp on the necks of racists. It's felt very violent and intimidating. And I found myself glued to the X doom scroll. And I found my levels of anxiety skyrocketed. There were times that I phoned up my boyfriend and was just like, I'm really not happy. I feel really scared. I'm genuinely very scared. Genuinely. I phoned up my boss in tears when I left work one day because there were just loads of police cars outside the building. And there'd been at the same time all the big Socialist Workers' Party mob standing outside Reform UK, so the racist scum, Nazi scum off our streets. And I'm like, well, I'm clearly the Nazi scum here.
So what was your take on the riots?
I think the most important thing is the sequencing of it all. Hare Hills came first. That was a riot. That was a fucking riot. You know, social services came and took kids off a Roma family and then everyone's fucking burning fridges and lobbing crap at police cars and the police are stepping way back. It becomes incendiary. They're stepping way back. That's a riot. Nothing was really done. Then, of course, throw into that and people watching it just going, this is crazy. It's all kicking off. And, these things do have the ability of, sparking further conflagrations. You then have Southport. And it's quite clear that after that horrific incident, that people are going to turn out on the streets. And they did. But I remember how it started. And it was people standing and protesting and the vigil that Sir Keir Starmer went to and people yelling at him. Then suddenly it becomes something else all around the place. And there's an element to that I'm like, okay, it's become something else all around the place. How did this happen? There wasn't a sort of simmering tension that got up and up and up and up and up and up and up. Now, of course, what the government have told you is people put misinformation on social media and that caused the riots. Well, even if that were to be the case, we know that 75% of the social media activity was coming from foreign bot farms, right? We know that. So the likelihood then is if you've put a post on social media, there's only a 1 in 4 chance that yours is the post that someone's read, maximum. Then, like I said, people turn up and it escalates. I ask myself the question, whether it was escalated purposefully. Now, I think it's highly likely that it was escalated purposefully. Then I suppose that leads to the question of who, and I don't have the answer to that. Certainly if you have got foreign bot farms trying to trigger division and unrest in Britain, then why would you not have activists on the ground, who will go and sort of bally up and be the ones to lob the first stones to then gee everyone up and create disorder on the streets. And I think that is something that we need to be very alive to in this country. When you've got all the counter protesters as well, the Socialist Workers' Party popping up with all their magically all these ready-made Corex boards. And you think, how are you so organised? How are you printing all this stuff? It's quite sophisticated to be able to do that. Hare Hills was actual rioting. This stuff, there were elements of sophistication. The message that went around saying there's going to be all these 100 protests that never happened. The messaging being put out from the government. What I can say and what we can all say is this. The way that it has worked out chronologically is that when the information is finally given that this guy indeed has also been charged with terror offences, and that was given the eve of the budget deliberately. Anyone who works in the media knows that governments will always sort of release things together in the hope that one kills off the other. And the government has a vested interest, and rightly so, that the country doesn't fall into disorder. And so if you're going to release information that might create people going tonto, it would probably help if all the newspaper front pages aren't amplifying that by the fact that within a day they're talking about the budget instead. So that's actually, in some respects, what a responsible government might do anyway. The problem is the cover-up in between. The problem is all the arrests. The problem is all the prosecutions based on what these people didn't go to court and have trials. That's the thing. A lot of them might be people who are well known to the police forces. When you looked at some of the rioters going down, they've got loads of previous convictions for, being disorderly, for robbery, for ABH, for, there were people out there who were just raucous. They wanted chaos. There are other people who've never had a brush with the law, ever, who are now in prison. Now, those people just having their collars felt and brought down to a police station to say, you do realise what you posted is pretty bad and it's in a volatile time. This could have implications. That person would be fucking terrified of ever posting anything again. That would have been enough. But instead, there was this really cynical process of making these people plead guilty. Like I said, they're not used to the law. They don't. You sit in a prison cell, being interviewed. You've never done anything like that before, and someone's, and then you've got the CPS lawyer there to help you. He just goes, well, you better off just pleading guilty, make it easier. So they do. And then they end up with these sentences and they're banged up, and it's going to change their lives and the lives of their families irrevocably. And then you think, if they had said, I'm not going to plead guilty, I'm going to take this to court, where I don't know the law very well, but one would assume if you say you posted this on social media and it caused riots, and that should have to be the thing that you can prove. Well, first of all, in some respects, Keir Starmer would have prejudiced all the cases by basically telling everyone that this is what's happened. All you people who've posted social media have created the riots and your far-right thugs. To me, it would be quite a prejudicial thing to have happened at the highest level. And I really am not particularly au fait with the law to know whether that would stand up or not in legal terms. But also the burden of proof that innocent until proven guilty. Would those would people have been sentenced at all, or would the sentences have been much less if it had to be proven in a court of law that by this person putting this thing on Facebook, it caused X to happen? So the sequencing was quite deliberate. The showing all these trials on television was very deliberate in order that when the information is then released and deliberately buried, nobody is going out on the street. Nobody is kicking off about it because they're now all too scared. That is the one thing I'd say. That's the only thing I can tell you about the riots. There's been a degree of choreography by whom I don't know, and the government's sequencing of the release of information has also been choreographed.
You'll certainly be more qualified to answer this question than me, and you'll definitely have a better idea. So if police officers was to raid a murderer's house and find terrorist scripture there, for example, and poison, how long do you think it would take before government officials had to be informed?
It's been told to me by various people that protocol would be terrorist literature, especially the presence of a harmful substance like ricin, is you've got an immediate briefing to government.
When this cover-up gets exposed, it's not going to be good at all for Starmer, is it?
What's going to happen though? Because they will have war-gamed this. So how are they now going to manage this next step in the process, which of course is the court case? Is it going to be a court case where newspaper journalists are sitting there in the press gallery, writing down every single word said and reporting it? Or is there going to be a function where they make sure that doesn't happen? I think there's a function available to them to make sure that doesn't happen.
Reporting restrictions.
And why? You've got to have a legal function. He was a minor at the time he committed the offence. He was under 18. He's not anymore, but at the time he committed the offence, he was a minor and the victims are minors. I wonder if there's going to be something in there that they try and use. Mm-hmm. We already know his identity, which was obviously released when he then became an adult, because that's when, under the age of 18, I think if you are a child, the judge has to lift the order that you have to be anonymised. So that's happened. But again, I think that probably had to happen, given all the tension surrounding it and all the misinformation and everything. A step had to be taken. But I wonder what they'll try and do to minimise fallout in January, because something else happens in January, and that's the inauguration of Donald Trump. Now, once Donald Trump is inaugurated, Elon Musk is protected in many respects by the state in America. We've already seen today Donald Trump turning around and saying to Mexico and Canada and China, all this crap coming into the country connected to drugs. If it continues coming into the country, bam, massive tariffs against you. Massive tariffs. You've either got to sort out that problem or you're going to have to pay a fucking load of money to sell your products into your biggest market. Very, very canny move. Now, X has really become the home of free speech. And when that trial begins in January, it will be where most people, I'd imagine, are still trying to go. It is already the place where most people go to try and get their information. And it'll be very difficult for the UK government to try and shut that down or do anything about it without Donald Trump saying to Starmer, all right, you're trying to shut down freedom of speech in your own country and regulating his platform. He's now Doge. He's part of my cabinet, my team, and America's going to respond like this. So I wonder, with these two events happening concurrently, the trial and then the sort of enshrined protection around Elon Musk and therefore X as a result of Trump's inauguration, what scenario that creates. I think this is the stupid thing, the best way for the government to manage any of these situations is honesty and speaking to the public. Unfortunately, Keir Starmer he can't do it. He's an automaton. He can't do it.
He's completely unrelatable.
I don't know why we waited so long for the terror charge. But if it was in the public domain swiftly, and then he said, look, I want to call for peace. This is deeply alarming. You know, terrorism is a scourge. Our security service is the best in the world. We rely on the general public to give us information. We want to protect everybody. And of course, throw in the usual caveat of, and, you know, ordinary Muslims aren't terrorists. That one has to always be said. All the shit probably wouldn't have happened. When you create a vacuum, that is when any sort of madness goes inside and can get prominence. And the unravelling of everybody after Southport was actually down to the government trying to manage the situation and choosing completely the wrong way of doing it. A way now that has other countries in the world, our Western allies, looking at us thinking we've turned into a mad, fascistic, authoritarian, anti-free speech society.
Do you think that Keir Starmer is a buffoon, or do you think he's purposeful? Because I got the impression when the civil unrest was in full swing, the energy I got from him was he's just rubbing his hands together thinking, well, this is perfect.
I don't think he's enjoying himself.
Not now.
I would give him that. I don't think he's enjoying it at all. I don't think he ever has enjoyed it. I think he is... I don't know him, but you always get the impression he's very robotic. You know, when they ask him, what's your favourite Disney film, what's your favourite book, doesn't have a favourite anything. It's sort of like, hello, is there a human in there? But clever, well, of course he's clever. You know, he was a director of public prosecutions. You don't get to that position in life being an absolute dunce. You know, if you're very adept at the law, you're going to be bloody smart. But you're also going to be one of those people who law is where everything begins and ends. You know, perhaps the emotional intelligence isn't there. Perhaps the sort of human interaction isn't there. Perhaps the sort of charisma's not there. But in terms of clever, without a doubt, of course he is. I just don't think he has he doesn't have the human touch like Boris Johnson had, for instance, who when he spoke, you listened. There was there was a light behind the eyes. He doesn't have that. He can't communicate. And also the people who advise him, you know, he's clearly surrounded by a conclave of pretty left-wing ideologically driven people. I don't know how much that applies to him as well. This man did obviously go and by choice go work in a Soviet workers' camp after university. Like, I think we need to talk about this a bit more. This guy's the prime minister and he was under a Czechoslovakian spy, you know, what was part of the USSR behind the Iron Curtain at the height of Cold War, and he went off on his gap year there. I mean, is that not important? That's not as important as being a member of the Bullingdon Club? It's beggars belief. But there's definitely a group of very ideologically driven people around him who will take things to be a political opportunity and say, far right, right and actually genuinely think that everything who's not their sort of ultra-Marxist ideology is far right.
Farage riots.
What's it got to do with him?
Oh, that's what I want to ask you. What did those riots have to do with
Nothing.
Nigel Farage?
Absolutely nothing. All he did was turn around and said what a gazillion other people had said, which is, I don't think we're being told everything. Because we weren't. It was bloody obvious we hadn't been told everything because we didn't know anything and people were speculating. But in order to silence people, in order to sort of squeeze out as much political capital as possible, they made sure that them and their key stakeholders, the James O'Briens of this world, pushed the narrative that it was a Farage riot. And you've got a load of idiots who will sit at, ITV on various morning shows or whatever it may be, the BBC, who will just pick up on it and repeat it. And it's like, well how? What? Why?
Because that was trending.
Yeah. Oh, and trends can be engineered. I've already told you about foreign bot farms. In theory, GCHQ, we've probably got the best cyber security in the world, so we're constantly told. So if they do bot farms, do you not think we do bot farms? I don't know. But you'd think if we were the best at knowing this technology, some of the best in the world, then we might occasionally use it ourselves. I don't know.
I'm surprised that James O'Brien didn't get in trouble for coining them the Farage riots.
They don't get into trouble on that side.
Because that's a severe allegation to make.
They don't get into trouble. They're never penalised. They get away with murder. You look at half the cabinet. The irony that this government have slung people in prison for inciting violence on social media. And you've got the health secretary who has talked about throwing people under a bus. You've got the deputy prime minister calling people scum. I mean, I'm afraid it's they never, on the left, you don't get into trouble. You are protected by a shroud of, we must have ingrained moral superiority. We're the people who are right. Everyone else is wrong. We say what we like, and guess what? If we've made a mistake, we get to do the mea culpa. But this also comes down to classism, right? You could have Majid Nawaz, right, who used to be, was he an Al-Qaeda, connected terrorist of some form, suddenly seeing the light and saying, I'm now on the other side. And he gets an LBC show. You get the whole people who sort of go, oh, Shamima Begum in the refugee camp, we must go see her. She was only a girl when she went over there. Blah, blah, blah. The arguments can happen for these people. We're allowed to sort of, you might have a young black kid who's gone shoplifting. It's like, well, he's been discriminated against. He's been marginalised throughout his life, which has led to this situation. We will bend and scrape and be compassionate and try and look at all the causes of criminality, of antisocial behaviour, of miscreants, when it comes to everybody but the white working class. They're never allowed redemption.
Should Shamima Begum be allowed back into the UK?
Yeah. I don't like her, but if you're going to use, I'm afraid with me, I just, for me, there's what's a child and what's not a child, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want children watching porn. I'm unhappy about children being exposed to social media. I don't want children being able to take puberty blockers. I don't want, so that's a child. So was she a child when she went over there? Yeah. If I'm going to turn around and say, well, these kids who've been bombarded by all this crap online, making them think they want to lop off their tits and take, drugs to grow a beard, are girls, and they're vulnerable, and they shouldn't have had that material pumped into them that has led to such a radical, destructive life choice, then what's the difference with her being bombarded by Islamism? Now, I'm not saying that she's some sort of hero and I feel sorry for her and I want to bend and scrape and I love Shamima. I'm not in the way, let's put her on the front of a magazine. Isn't she actually attractive? And now she dresses in Western clothes and isn't she nice? We've heard reports of the things she might have done or the things she might have been complicit in when she was over there. But for me, if you're going to have a rule, there's a rule. There's no two tiers. So if there's a rule for the kids being harmed by gender ideology and when they're under the age of majority, then I'm afraid by my own logic, and I have to be consistent with my logic because that's all we have. By my own logic, that applies to her. So she has to come home.
And how would we manage her if she did come home?
But too late now to pump her for information on who she was and what she knew and what the connections were, because that information is probably useless at this point. If she comes back, she would need round-the-clock protection because she's just, very knowable.
Rather than around-the-clock prison.
Well, I don't know. I mean, because what you've got to do then is you're putting someone on trial for actions that they committed in a different country and having to evidence them massively in retrospect. I mean, you've dug ourselves a big hole with Shamima. But the difficulty is, of course, if it sets a legal precedent that this terrorist must come home because of whatever the precedent is under the ECHR, right to family life or whatever, then that opens the door because it sets a case precedent for a load of other ne'er-do-wells who could still be deeply rooted in terrorism to come back as well. So I don't know, but I don't like to be a hypocrite. And if I jump up and shout about 2 tiers, which I do a lot, then sometimes you've got to think, hold on, would this be a system where you're saying, actually, these people are children. Oh, but this person isn't because the crime is different, because the effect is different, because the content they were looking at was of a different nature. Either someone's a child or they're not a child. And I think it kind of has to be like that. But then saying that, I think when it comes to certain offences, there's usually the protections given to. There was that story of the 2 14-year-olds who pursued and knifed that kid to death. Do you remember that?
Well, there's been a few.
So every day now. It's particularly brutal,
sadly,
this one. Particularly brutal. I can't remember where it was now.
It's very sad that I can't pinpoint that actual incident because there is so many.
No, they aren't named, obviously, because they were 14 when it happened, and they will go to a detention centre, which is probably the right thing. But it doesn't make them poor little misguided children. They're fucking monsters. They're just the evil. And I actually think when it comes to, if you've got a minor of the age of 14 who's carrying a knife, the parents should have their collars felt as well.
If you was Prime Minister, which I believe you're striving for one day.
Well, maybe.
If you were Prime Minister, how would you deal with the current scourge of knife crime?
You've got to be absolutist. You've got to say you carry a weapon. You're actually going to a boar stall or whatever for like 2 years. I don't know. But you have to build the infrastructure that these people go to. And there has to be immediate punishment. And there has to be more people, more stop and search, more detection. I lived in Kenya, and you can't go into a shopping centre, a nightclub, a restaurant, anywhere without walking through a barrier to see if you've got anything on you. You can't go anywhere. You look at Notting Hill Carnival, right, and they set up these 2 sort of blades detectors, metal detectors, but it was an option whether you walked through it. That makes sense. To have a load of people just walking through, beep, beep, nothing on me. And it's everyone else just like going around the outside. It's just mad.
What's that, optics?
Yeah, optics. But, for instance, knife crime, Notting Hill Carnival, put it in a controlled space like Hyde Park and make sure everybody goes through, everyone has a ticket and everyone has a search. Because you couldn't even go and watch the Mavericks do a concert at, some local town hall these days without having to do the handbag check and all the rest of it.
Year in, year out at Notting Hill Carnival, someone gets stabbed. Someone gets murdered. But if you criticise that, you get lambasted for criticising somebody being murdered.
That's mad.
Now, why does that take place?
You know why it takes place? Because this is a minority festival, and so they have certain privileges and rights, and you can't criticise and you can't talk about it because racism trumps everything. Everything's racist, and racism is the top. Even when it comes to matters of women's safety, George Maloney's now turned around and said, people might call me a racist, but sexual assaults and crimes are committed far more by foreign nationals than the domestic population. Why should it be a racist thing to point out something that is statistically true? And why is the safety of women and girls not paramount?
And why are the crime stats on nationality not printed?
Because we know what they're going to say. Now, I've actually, it's been suggested to me that statistics are going to be coming out, but let's see. Again, choreographed, massaged, protected.
Because they do in Sweden, didn't they?
They do in Sweden, they do in Denmark, they do in Germany.
And have you seen the stats?
I know the stats, yeah, I've seen them. And it's soul-destroying.
To bring it to the audience's attention, so in the UK, criminal activity based on nationality, you can't have access to it, but in other countries you can. So yeah. I'd imagine they're going to be similar. So just through your own experience, your lived experience, what have you seen?
Denmark, Sweden, the statistics show that the vast amount of sexual assaults and rapes, and these are the ones that are reported, of course, are at the hands of what essentially men from North African, Middle Eastern origin, sometimes East African.
Migrants.
Yeah, migrants. But in particular, when you look at the countries that we're talking about, and not exclusively, by the way, I'm not saying all rape and all sexual assaults or anything like that. But the overrepresentation, when you then sort of superimpose that onto per capita of the population and the amount of, the ratio of this particular community within a society, the overrepresentation of rape and sexual assaults against women happening, being perpetrated by young men who have come from Muslim majority countries. That's what we're talking about here. I'm actually in the middle of making a documentary on this exact topic, and I'm going to be going through all of the statistics and looking at that. It's a topic that I'm going to keep fighting about and fighting for until my last breath, because at the end of the day, women's safety is of the highest level of importance. But we also need to have a conversation about the other side of this. And it's kind of what I was referring to about influencer culture earlier. We've gone down a dangerous route of saying that liberty and empowerment for women is doing what the fuck you want, and aggrandizing this idea that permissiveness, promiscuity, hypersexuality is a good thing and should be celebrated. This is so dangerous for women. The whole push that we should all like 50 Shades of Grey and everyone should want to be getting tied up and spat on, have a fish hook in the mouth and their ponytail pulled. I don't think many women want that. That's disgusting and dehumanizing and degrading. There might be the odd people who like that sort of fetish, but I don't think that's the majority of the population. And it opens the doors to other things we have seen happen, such as the rough sex defence in court, where a man has killed a woman in bed, picked her up on a Tinder date and killed her in bed. And they said, we were just having rough sex. It's not my fault. It wasn't rape. And we also need to be saying to little girls and young women, and women full stop, that big lip fillers, bum implants, the boobs, wanting to be like Nicki Minaj or whatever, then going out dressed like this and getting really drunk. And at the end of the day, is that going to get you what is going to fulfill you and make you content? No. Now, I'm not saying that women shouldn't be able to wear what they want. I'm not sort of, I'm not someone for imposing oppressive rules on people. But some people might think I'm the rebirth of Mary Whitehouse when I say, fundamentally, what makes for a happy society and a happy individual is respect in a relationship, monogamy, and family. Those are the things that make people happy. In a broken society, you get kids who are brought up with more psychological complexities. I put myself in that category. My father left me at an early age. I know what that feels like. It hurts. It's the most horrible thing. I could cry about it now. It's the most horrible thing for a kid to have, for a parent not to be in your life and not to want you, to reject you. A rejection is a horrible thing. A woman goes out and sleeps with multiple men. Now, in most people, it creates a surge of hormones, that oxytocin, that make you want to fall in love and have a psychological connection. When then that isn't fulfilled because you've given something away too easily and then you feel rejected and not wanted, what most women might do then is go and find someone else or find someone else or so they keep getting affirmed. So that sense of rejection is glazed over. That man didn't text you, slept with him, he didn't text you back, we'll just sleep with someone else. And they think the power is in the numbers of, well, I can now have this person instead, I can have this person instead. Then they get to a point where they suddenly think, this doesn't make me happy. I want a boyfriend. I want a husband. I want to be a mom. And it's the same for men as well. It comes to a point where the swiping and the one-night stands makes them feel hollow, unfulfilled, because we're wired up as humans to want family. And so we also, at the same time as talking about when men come from certain countries where women are completely covered up, and so they come to Britain and they see these girls in teeny little tops who are also told, yeah, it's really good to be permissive and free and sexually liberal. Then at the same time, they're dangerously being told, if your hackles go up because you see a group of men who look like they just got off a boat, you're probably a racist if you're afraid of them. So you've kind of eroded all of their natural inbuilt common sense, gut instinct and resilience. You end up with a toxic cocktail. We need to have a conversation with women and with men, and this isn't had enough in the 21st century. Where's that that societal thing gone, that if you got to a certain age and you're not married and you don't have children, you're the weird one. That's not good. That there is something funny about that situation and that you're going to be unfulfilled. Where is the sort of stigma and shame around that? Because I still think to some degree it should exist, because actually, like I said, all the statistics bear out the fact that men live longer and are less depressed. Children are brought up better and are happier. Society as itself, it's strengthened and improved by monogamy, commitment, and family units. Because that's just the fucking truth. The problem is societal. And we're not talking about that.
Recently, I interviewed an OnlyFans celebrity, a porn star. I mean, I got backlash for platforming this woman. Not that she needed platforming. If anything, she platformed me. And I don't give a monkey's what backlash I get either. I've got a job to do, and that is to have conversations with people and let them share their story. So, it's interesting and it spreads awareness to a certain extent. And for me, I mean, I wasn't sitting there agreeing the whole way with everything she does. In fact, if anything, I said, well, what you're doing is morally bankrupt, and some of the things you've told me are actually quite shocking, in the hope that someone watches it and thinks that isn't the norm, because I do think that the younger generation are going down a very slippery slope.
When we were kids, I remember the Spice Girls being deemed really risque because they had these little dresses and these big heels, like, oh, girl power. And it was like, that's bold, isn't it? Fuck, like, it's a bit much, isn't it? The Spice Girls, for fuck's sake, they just look like Bratz dolls today. Do you know what I mean? That is so harmless. That is so nothing. When you look at stuff being pushed today, like you watch a video of Rihanna going like, it's basically soft porn. We've been absolutely societally groomed to reject and actively campaign against the stuff that makes us healthy and happy as humans. And it makes me very, very sad indeed. And interestingly, I think the youngest generation now, the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas, are looking for that. When you look at them, look at kids in high school, look at kids in their teens, they don't like the sexual content. They're quite prim, they're quite conservative. So every ideology becomes extinct at some point, what your parents did suddenly becomes uncool. And society claps back. And I actually think one thing that gives me a degree of solace is that we've fucked it up, right? Our generation fucked this up. We're the ones who have opened the door to all this stuff. Yes, it started to happen to us, but really, you look at the 80s and it wasn't really the sort of hypersexualization that our generation has not just permitted, but taken part in and gleefully celebrated. And we've fucked up society in many respects as a result. But I think what's going to happen next is there will be a sort of there will be conservatism in a social sense. There will be a reaching back to, whether it be Christianity, whether it be to prudishness. I think that change is hopefully happening in the younger generation by a sort of almost necessity. I hope so, because I don't see how much further we can go. Like, what, we're just going to fucking walk around naked and shag against lampposts? I mean, how much further can we actually get to at this point when you've got a woman who, I mean, has nobody pointed out that if this was a man, and that there is a power dynamic and a big difference between the sexes, that's something else that always needs to be made aware of. Men and women are fucking fundamentally different. They always will be. And men can't be women. Fact. If this was a man, a male porn star, who said, I'm going to go to university campuses and any 18-year-old girl who wants to be shagged, come and queue up. Now, we know how fucking grim that sounds.
He'd have got beat up in my day.
That is so problematic. That is so disgusting. He couldn't do it, right? And yet society would tell women that he should be able to, and that they should be as free as the men to go queue up and, be part of that experiment. And at the same time, these 18-year-old boys all waiting in the, corridors to go and shag this woman. Boys mature at a much slower rate than girls. They're still kids, really. If I was a mother and I had an 18-year-old son, I'd be fucking horrified if that woman was on my son's university campus. It's not okay. But these kids are being brought up now from the age of 8, a lot of them, on watching pornography.
Well, you've mentioned porn a few times now. And for the record, I will continue to platform, have conversations, interview porn stars,
Yeah.
male and female, if the time comes where they're in the limelight and all eyes
Yeah.
are on them. So do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that I am prepared to essentially platform
it's a good
further?
thing. It's a good thing because when you spoke to Bonnie Blue or whatever she's called, you look at all the comments underneath and it was consolidating. Everyone just goes, this is really deranged. So actually, great, well done. And you need people to realise that it's deranged. Now look, I want to make it abundantly clear. I'm not saying ban pornography. It will always exist. It has to. It's human nature to want titillation and sexual stimulation. You're not going to be able to ban anything, and there's potentially nothing wrong with that. But previously, porn used to be magazines on top shelves with opaque covers and just still pictures of a woman with a fucking giant bush. Looked a bit like God intended. And, you know, a magazine might be passed around by kids at school and laughed about. That is hugely different to online porn. A few things have changed. One is the electrification of this, the digitisation, where you've got lots of thumbnails that show very active content, and the range and the stuff and the levels you can go to with video is a lot more than a still picture. It's a lot more explicit, a lot more grotesque. And it is escalating. Someone watches one video and they can watch another and another and another. And a bit like online gambling, the brain is sort of hyperstimulated. So it leads people to going to more and more extreme content. This then creates a market, a bit like sugar addiction, that you need to keep feeding. And the problem with the user-generated content is there's no fucking checks about who's in those videos, who's posting those videos, whether there's consent, what it involves. Completely unregulated. Completely. Now, when it was DVDs, male and female actors and actresses, the women were paid more than men, usually, and they would have that, I'm prepared to do this, I'm not prepared to do that. It's consenting people wanting to make their money that way. And so in that sense, it was totally self-regulating. If something was going to be sold commercially, it has to be looked at by the BBFC. It has to be looked at for an age rating. So it's regulated. And also there's a sort of taboo element of someone actually having to go into a shop and part with money and take home a physical thing that they then put into their, you know, there's no sort of veil of anonymity. There's no instant gratification. There's a process to have access to and then watch. And a limited amount of content that can be packed into one DVD or whatever. The problem with the user-generated content is it's a bit like we were talking about Netflix and what to watch earlier. It is totally limitless. It is boundless. And it enables the brain to then become boundless. But also you look at Pornhub. There have been multiple cases of Pornhub where someone's been raped and that video is being put online and monetized. And someone who's put a video online of someone being raped has made loads of money, including the platform itself. That is evil. Now, when someone took this to court and actually took Visa to court as the payment process being used, Visa asked Pornhub to do an audit of all of their content. Don't want anything showing bestiality, nothing that's going to show injury, degradation of women, like severe degradation. I'm not talking about a sort of smack on the bum. I'm talking about humiliation. Nothing that's underage, nothing that could be raped. All the sort of stuff that you think just shouldn't exist because it's actually crime. It shouldn't even exist because it's exploitation and crime. Do you know how many videos Pornhub had to take down? 88%.
Wow.
You do realise, okay, so when...
How on earth did that platform
when the Ukraine,
just not get shut down
Why
completely?
is it going? I don't know. When the Ukraine war broke out and you saw scores of women and children fleeing for their safety, trying to get over into Poland, there were people, there were traffickers waiting for them. Send a message and come this way, we're connected to the Red Cross, come this way, we'll make you safe. You had people sort of putting adverts on Facebook, didn't you? You can come and stay at my house, I'll take a refugee. There were a lot of horrible fucking opportunists involved. Countless women and children have been taken away for sex slavery, domestic servitude, organ harvesting. If someone sits there and watches a video on Pornhub of whatever, I don't know, bukkake or smacking someone about and the woman's, ask yourself if that person is doing that willingly and how do you know? Or how do you know this young woman hasn't been trafficked?
I'm very happy to platform porn actors and actresses for for this very reason. I'm hoping to get older generation porn stars so they can give a cautionary tale.
I would rather have the Bonnie Blues of this world doing what she does and it only be Bonnie Blue. If she wants to do that, fine. I think there's something really fucked up about it being going after college kids. Why aren't you going after men?
Is that her niche fame? Is it getting her maximum attention?
She knows that these people are A, more willing to probably do it, B, it probably poses less physical risk to her. You know, they're more impressionable, they're more likely, and probably also there's going to be an aesthetic element that she's not going to get Jimmy Five Bellies rocking up and trying to land one inside her. So, I'm sure these things were in her consideration, but there's something very warped about it. We shouldn't throw young men under the bus, which we do all the time. We look at everything happening in the world as uniquely affecting women detrimentally. Porn arguably affects men detrimentally even more.
Speaking of how things affect women, illegal migration is probably the biggest bone of contention in the country. And I have a lot of men sitting opposite me, shaking their fist about how, angry and put out a joint they are and that they're put second. There's a plethora of fears and concerns and worries and genuine reason for a lot of people to be very, very angry at the moment with the country. But I never hear it from a woman's perspective, like how it would make a female feel knowing that there's unfettered migrants coming in the country, because we know that they come from a very different place where they perceive women very differently. Yeah. And when they land, they get given a smartphone. We know this. They then get immediate access to porn.
Well, I'll tell you what, it depends what women you're asking, doesn't it?
You as a human being.
Well, me as a human being, it's like I said, women's safety and integrity is being thrown under the bus at the altar of mass immigration and, racism and all the rest of it, and political correctness. And it's absolutely not okay. Absolutely not okay. But depending what woman you ask that question to, you're going to get a different response. By and large, a middle-class white woman will tell you, it's awful, these poor people, they need to be looked after. Racist to even ask the question. There's a number of reasons why. One is they've probably had to go through the DEI bullshitting process a lot more. If you've gone to a posh school or then you work in Goldman Sachs or you've gone to university or you're working at the BBC or in the civil service or whatever, you've had to tug your forelock to all of that diversity crap the whole way through to get where you want. So you've kind of essentially been gaslit to the point you become the gaslighter. Point number one. Point number two is it's luxury ideology. The middle classes can't go, I've got a smartphone and you don't anymore. Contrary to popular opinion, the wealth gap in many respects or quality of life gap's actually closed. A lot, Everyone can have a smart TV and a smartphone and a foreign holiday and all the trappings of luxury that are only available to the middle classes. And keeping up with the Joneses was all about having the stuff. Well, now that playing field is being levelled, the keeping up the Joneses, the stuff is ideology. You show your middle class, you show your class status by adopting and being able to enact the radical ideologies that you've been brainwashed with. Now, why do they get to do that? Why does that why is it that working class people aren't also going like, oh, but the poor migrants, we must love them all. You're a racist to even ask this question if this is going to affect women's safety. Because it's in their communities. The middle-class white woman living in Hampstead doesn't have a migrant hotel. She didn't have a load of, young men aged 14 smoking cigarettes and wanting to exchange Snapchat details with their teenage daughter outside the school gate. She doesn't have that. It doesn't affect their lives right now. It doesn't affect them. They're not living in the places where this is happening. You work in a profession and you sit at a desk next to a man from Iran, whether you're a nuclear scientist, a civil servant, a journalist, a teacher, you're going to be meeting and knowing and working regularly with an educated person from Iran who's from the middle classes, who will share Western values and will have probably integrated, has language skills and is probably very Westernized. If you meet a man who's come off the boat, who isn't from the educated professions, but he was a goat herd, he doesn't speak the language. He probably thinks that a woman showing a bit of ankle should have rocks thrown at her. The exposure and the type of person, the type of migrants you're meeting is massively different. The idea that you can take poor men from radically different cultures and the minute they somehow land on our shores, they have suddenly all the years of their life where they've never had a Western education. They've never been exposed to our values. They've never been brought up in our society. That all of a sudden that stuff is going to just, by magical osmosis, be inside them. They're going to be upstanding, integrated British citizens. It's for the fucking birds. Of course that doesn't happen. In the same way that if I suddenly went to live in, rural Afghanistan, I'm not going to know what the rules are. I'm not going to know how to live. I'm going to find that way of life totally alien to me and make all sorts of faux pas. Why would it not be the same coming the other way round? So it does matter on what class of society you're at, because the Iranian nuclear scientist and the Afghan goat herd, or the Afghan nuclear scientist and the Afghan goat herd, are very different fucking offerings and very different experiences to interact with. The problem is with the illegal migration thing, and it's deeply concerning because these people are unchecked, unvetted. We know that illegal migratory routes are used as cash cows, at the very least for terrorist organisations. The same way that the Taliban once made all their money from poppy fields and selling opium and drugs cartels, the biggest illicit trade now in the world is the trade in humans. It's the biggest one. And so much more, earning money from drugs is small time these days. People trafficking is where you get the big bucks. And who are the ones making the money from this? It's Hezbollah, it's Hamas, it's the Taliban, it's Al-Qaeda, it's the PKK, it's the pro-Khalistan movements, it's the Wagner mercenaries, it's all the sort of, this is how they make money, through criminality, right? Whether it's selling drugs or selling the transit of people. So we're already filling the pockets of ne'er-do-wells who hate this country, but we're also allowing Lord knows who connected to these organisations in, even if it's just gangsters and, drug dealers wanting people to go work in a cannabis farm. It's the criminal underworld you're feeding and aiding and abetting. At the very least, even if this is a genuine refugee, they've paid fuckloads of money to people who shouldn't be in receipt of any sorts of money. It's a madness. But that is bad enough. But the problem here now is this has become the big distraction. Look at the boats. Look at the boats. And what did we learn? We learned that out of all the OECD groups of nations, the wealthiest nations on earth, that our levels of legal migration, and not just legal, but permanent style, as it's called, which means people who will come and not go back. They haven't come as a seasonal worker, but they've come to live. It's the highest in the world. And I'm more concerned on some level about the fact that we've got 1 million people gross coming into the country every year. Every year. Now, we are always given the net figures, but that means that people have emigrated. By and large, the people there might be people going home, but a lot of the people we're losing are people we don't want to, doctors and nurses to Australia and so on and so forth. People just going to Dubai because they've had enough because this country is shite. I love this country, but it does feel shite right now. But if you've got 750,000 people coming from all around the world to live in your country, you're beginning to chip away at what it means to be your country's identity. It's the things that make a country, the commonality, the shared language, the same history, the same heritage, the same culture, laughing at the same jokes, listening to the same music. You're beginning to chip away at that stuff because you're essentially drowning it out. You're beginning to dilute it, for want of a better word, because dilution kind of starts sounding quite ethno-nationalist, and I don't mean it to be that. I have nothing wrong when it comes to race in this issue. I do have something wrong with once you have committed sort of industrial scales cultural vandalism, you can't really get it back. It's very difficult when you have sort of started losing your history and your cultural identity to artificially remanufacture it. And that's the argument actually against colonialism, that white people went to Australia and the Aboriginal culture was dominated and drowned out. So, you can make the same argument, even though it's on a very different scale and a very different approach, but there's a validity in making the same argument about protecting our own heritage and making sure that immigration happens at numbers that's sustainable, both economically and in terms of infrastructure, but also culturally, when it comes to not just integration, but assimilation.
So if we can touch base on feelings for 1 second.
Right.
So there's a spike in violence against women. That's a headline I do not like to read at all. There's an influx in migrants coming over. So 2 things. Is there an obvious link that people are denying? And also, as a woman, Knowing all of that, how does it actually make you feel?
Is there a link? Well, look, until we have statistical evidence, you can't prove or disprove something. That statistical evidence is withheld from us. But I think anybody with a shard of common sense or logic would assume that there is, given what the empirical evidence is that's available from other countries, and given what the left always like to term lived experience. How does it make me feel? I think the thing I get the most is anger. I'm so angry. I'm so angry that I'm going to be motivated forever to do something about this. And yet, who am I angry at? Not the people on the boats.
It's got to be the people allowing it.
Not the migrants. They're humans. They're going to take the opportunity if they can. Why wouldn't they? Right? If our country goes to shit, which it kind of constantly feels like it's going to, and all of a sudden you thought you could go to somewhere where, you could make more money and have a freer life, whatever it may be, you're going to take that opportunity. Why wouldn't you?
Totally agree.
It's the weakness and cowardice of the political classes and people leading in business and people leading in the professional classes, because everyone's got a stakeholder in this, whether you're the person reporting on the story in the media, whether you're the doctor at hospital who can see patterns of things being put in front of them but dare not blow the whistle or speak truth to power, whether you are the politician, whether you are, whatever it may be, right? If you're in a position where you actually have a degree of influence and a degree of power and a bit of status, middle class and upwards, fucking do something about it, because this is your country.
Do you get challenged off air, or do you find that most people agree but they just don't want to say it out loud in public?
No, not many people tend to challenge me off air, really. Maybe there is a sense that people agree. I don't know. But like I said, a lot of the time, I think a lot of people probably do agree, but it's cowardice and selfishness. Really, it's a lack of guts and a lack of wanting to get out of your comfort zone. And it doesn't pass muster anymore because, frankly, the people destroying this country are the people of this country, because they're not fucking going, this ain't right.
They're not fighting for it no more.
They're not fighting for it. Now, what does fighting for it look like? It doesn't look like fighting.
Throwing bricks at police officers, no.
The fighting for it is having the willingness to listen and having the guts, the togetherness and the calmness, actually, the resolution, the steadfast faith and belief in that what you know is the right thing. And having the faith to say, I am as much part of doing something about this as everybody else. We can't just go, I'll wait for someone else to deal with it. If everybody suddenly went, I'm going to be part of that change, it would overnight, we'd have a different complexion.
Speaking of cowardice, I put a tweet out on X and I said, if you were sat opposite Alex Phillips, what one question would you ask? And somebody put in the comments, I would ask her why it's taken her so long to look into the persecution of Tommy Robinson. I then commented underneath saying, what I'll actually ask is, how come you're the first mainstream journalist to highlight the persecution of Tommy Robinson? So if we're going to talk about bravery, what made you go there? Knowing that you could get massive backlash or even cancelled?
Because so far it hasn't happened. And because, like I said, I've suddenly realised that we are all stakeholders in this. You can't expect someone else to do something if you're not going to do it yourself. So maybe that's it. Also, frankly, I'm, as much as all the people I'm talking about, the middle classes who have to tug their forelock to diversity and to get to where they are, I've been on that travelator. After university, I went and lived around the world working as a journalist in loads of different countries, mainly across the Commonwealth. Came home, went to journalism school and worked for ITV and then the BBC. So then I'm on the travelator, right? And what happened was, I remember once at a meeting at the BBC, it was when, it was a year after the Eastern European countries had given freedom of movement to the UK, and they wanted to do a sort of talk about, a year later, how have things changed? Sitting in this editorial meeting, they're like, I know this amazing text of, my wonderful hairdresser. We can go and look at this, Polish restaurant and the meals are really delicious and And I was like, what about the school where the teacher's struggling to teach kids because there's 7 different languages? everyone just sort of looked at me like I was speaking, I was basically going, fucking hate the Poles, they're evil, send them all home. Why would anyone? I fucking love the Poles. Bring them back. I'm missing them, can I just say? And I remember sitting in that editorial meeting thinking, I can't live like this. I can't be in an organisation that you can't talk about stuff and you're the BBC. And so I left to go and work for Nigel Farage. I was on their VIP training scheme. I was one of 10 people picked from around the country to be fast-tracked through the BBC as a star of the future. One of 10 in the whole country. And I fucking left that to go and work for Nigel Farage before anyone even knew who he was. So I stood up and made my decision a long fucking time ago, that I was prepared to sacrifice to do what I believe in. Now, when it comes to the Tommy thing, there is still something going on politically because of things baked into society that it's still incredibly difficult to address. It's still very difficult to... what's at stake for a lot of people is a lot. What's interesting is with Tommy, he's lost it all already. He couldn't suddenly come out of prison and go, do you know what? I'm done with being Tommy Robinson. I'm going to go back to being Stephen Yaxley Lennon. I'm going to go get a job as... It's done now, isn't it? It's gone. He's made his bed and he's got to lie in it. He doesn't have a choice anymore, and he's fighting. He's fighting and saying, I got nothing to lose. A lot of people like this still have a lot to lose, and it's a big decision. If you're prepared to jeopardize it or risk it, particularly when it comes to economics and finance, right? If you're a journalist and you got children or whatever, or journalists aren't paid a lot. When people see someone on Telebox, they assume they're sort of rolling around in a Merc. No, they're not. Journalists are paid shit unless you're Gary Lineker. So if that's your main source of income and you're worried that you're going to lose it, and everyone's replaceable, especially if you're on telly or radio, everybody wants that job. Could be replaced in a second. Then it's very difficult thinking I'm going to risk this. It's tenuous anyway, and I'm prepared to just, put some TNT underneath it. But I've got past form with doing this anyway in life, right? Like I said, left BBC to go to, I've taken those risks, and it's always worked out for me. But also I'm a believer in God. I'm a big believer in God. And for those people who are listening who aren't religious, this stuff always sounds a bit balmy to somebody who isn't a believer. But for those people who are listening who are believers, they will understand what I say when I say I feel his hand on my shoulder. And that gives one courage. So, circumstantially, I hadn't even really sort of spoken about it because he's not mentioned in newsrooms. He's persona non grata in newsrooms. So his name hasn't really come up a lot in my life anyway. During the riots, I went to do an interview with Panorama and his name came up and they said, what do you think about Tommy Robinson? I knew they were trying to ask some sort of leading question. And I said, I don't know him. I've not met him. Still to this day, I have not met him. So I don't know. But he's a phenomenon, and shouldn't, as a journalist, you be asking why Tommy Robinson instead? Now, since that, Tommy got in touch with me on Twitter and said something about, I liked what you posted or something. I can remember his name popping up and thinking,
that's him.
Robinson's messaged me. Yeah, so I just replied. Turns out he loves replying, doesn't he? He's like, well, probably can't so much right now. But he's communicates, quick fire. And so then I said to him, well, let's do an interview because I thought, this is ridiculous. I watched his Oxford Union presentation, and do you know what I felt when I saw him? I was so proud of him.
Incredible, wasn't it?
Oh, I was so proud of him in that moment. This working class man.
And he was young back then.
Young, little podgy face. This working class man standing up in front of the toughest audience. Most top academics would be scared going into that lion's pit. And I felt a real sense of pride in him. And then after interviewing him and hearing about his story, that was an education for me as well. And we spoke for way over 2 hours. The interview on thatalexwoman.com is an hour long. because A, you need to cut things down to be able to be hosted on the site. But also he talked a lot about the documentary, and unfortunately law's the law.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, having spoken to him, I then went back. He said to me, go and look at the old protests down in Luton. Yeah, there was a load of skinheads and thug-looking people, if you will. You're a thug-looking person, working class.
I tick all in boxes.
Loads of people, carrying placards. There's even one video of a load of people in Bally's burning a flag. They're burning the swastika. They're burning the Nazi flag. And when I went back and Tommy said, look at the sort of things we were saying, they had signs saying no to racism. I'm like, eh? Like, I'm 40 and I hadn't done my research before this point. And I went and I was like, so then you kind of go on a hunt. I'm going to find the thing he said and done. I'm going to weed it. Why? I'm going to find it. And I haven't been able to, other than, simple fact, he comes from a dog-eat-dog world. Neighbourhood he was brought up in. A dog-eat-dog world where it's kind of survival of the fittest. Yeah, he used to be a hooligan. He owns up to that stuff. And like I said to you at the start of this interview, I've lived in that world as well. I've worked in the nightclubs and the pubs of Gloucester. That's Britain. They're the people who, if there was a war tomorrow, they're fighting for it. They're the people who are the bastions of our heritage, our humour, our culture, the bricks and mortar. It's them. They're the ones who make a pub a lively and exciting place, not a fucking gastro pub with gin and tonic for 25 quid with half the garden in a flower vase. No, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want the bawdy humour. I want the sort of un-PC jokes. I want the sort of, we'll have our fights, we'll resolve them. Come into my house, borrow anything you like. I'll do that for you. I'll mow your lawn. My kid will go up that ladder for you. Community. And that's exactly what the middle class don't have. They don't even know what it is. They've got zero fucking community. So I know when the shit hits the fan, I know what the backbone of this country is. Not just the backbone, but the beating heart.
So after actually interviewing Tommy,
yeah,
did you get any backlash for interviewing him?
No. Did
Nigel Farage not say anything to you about it?
He's not said anything to me.
Because he does distance himself from Tommy.
Yeah, well, we haven't actually spoken about it. I've spoken to Nigel since, but it didn't come up in our conversation. He'll be aware of it.
Yeah. Why do you think Nigel Farage does distance himself from Tommy? Because they've got the same fan base.
Look, I don't want to be piggy in the middle in this one. And it's not fair for me to sort of say one thing or another or assume something or the other. I adore Nigel. He's one of my best friends in the world. I was his right-hand woman for a long time. What I do know, what I can tell you is he's very astute politically. And he knows that Reform have got a real chance now. 5 seats in Parliament, looking at the current polling, and we're only 3 months into this new Labour government. It's not really working out, is it? I don't think the sort of huge boost of Badenoch's having the right sort of impact. It seems to me, and we're still a long way away from the next election, but if Reform can target, this is to win seats in our Parliament under our system, it's not good enough to just go, we're going to say what we believe and that's it. You've got to strategise tactically. That involves both targeting certain constituencies, looking where you got your second places, putting funding resources, building up local branches, building up, a head of steam and a sort of a centrifugal force in certain areas. There's those mechanics. The other mechanics are to get a majority, right? You look at the seats where you've got the most likely demographic. For Reform, it's largely white working class seats where they're going to probably perform super well. For obvious reasons, like you said, the same fan base. But also to get yourself over the line, in a lot of these instances, you need to build blocks of voters. So you need to be able to get those people who are your base. You also need to drag in some of the people who aren't naturally your base. The sort of grey collar sector, the professional classes, now these people who aren't necessarily your base might not have had the scales fall away from their eyes yet, like I've been talking about. And so, and again, for a lot of people, however much we think everything is now online, a lot of people are still heavily influenced by legacy media. So, what would happen? I'm not saying this is Nigel's thinking, but logically speaking, if Nigel turned around and said, Tommy Robinson, even if he just said something really neutral. In fact, if he just said Tommy Robinson without even finishing the sentence, if he just went Tommy Robinson, that's all that they're going to talk about every time he's interviewed. But you said the other day, Tommy Robinson, you said, so he can talk as much as he likes about reforming the NHS or improving education or tackling the cost of living crisis or geopolitics or how much money we should be. Doesn't fucking matter. It's gone. It's done. Because all they'll say is, but you said Tommy Robinson. So all of a sudden, this vote that he's got stays, might grow a bit. The other votes he needs to get over the line to win seats to actually affect political change is minimised. Now, that's just election strategy, of which I've done a lot myself, not just in the UK, but other countries. So choices are made politically, and those choices are political, not necessarily personal, in the same way that, you know, we've been speaking already about that people having a lot at stake just in the ordinary world of saying what they think. Even if you're just someone who runs a bakery and it's your own family business, you're worried about what you can say and do. When you get into the world of politics at the highest level, the stakes are even fucking higher because everyone's waiting to trip you up, especially if you're Nigel Farage. They're all waiting to find whatever they can to try and prevent you being successful. So he has to figure out. It's a narrow path, but he's got to figure out how to walk it. That will change. That will change. You know, things do dramatically change. When he first entered into politics and just spoke about leaving the EU, leaving a trading bloc, racist, lunatic, fruitcake. That's all he said. He just wanted to leave the EU. Perfectly normal. We've actually left it now. Then when he started saying immigration levels are too high, racist, monster. Well, now it's a conversation that even the Labour Party are prepared to say, well, you know, we've got to bring down the levels of immigration. So he's the one who actually shifts the narrative in this country, moves the debate along quite often. And he doesn't shy away from doing it. And he's also one of the best readers of the political tea leaves. So let him figure that out.
People will be expecting me to ask the question. I understand why Nigel Farage won't mention Tommy politically. That does make political sense, and I can see why he would do that. Not mentioning Tommy is obviously a different ball game to actually denouncing him, and people want to know, did Richard Tice overstep the mark recently where he completely denounced Tommy and his followers by referring to them as that lot, and he was dismissive?
Look, I know Richard Tice really dearly. As a huge intrinsic part of reform, and at some point I probably will be again. But I know these people personally, and I'm not advising them strategically. And I don't want to say anything that will, you know, that's going to upset anybody. I think that, you know, just from the evidence of what the reaction's been to how Richard phrased himself is, you know, you even sort of asked it in the opening of the question, people then said to him. So that you've answered your own question, really, haven't you? It didn't have the optimal response.
Oh, God, no. I wonder if he even meant that.
No, I don't think he did. And I think that Nigel is far more adept because he's far more practiced. He's been doing this for ages, and Nigel's had the shit thrown at him for ages. He's a professional shit dodger now. Most of the time the shit hits him and actually just makes him stronger because it's their bullshit, not his. Richard is contextually not as experienced as Nigel. And also because he's polite and nice and, you know, articulate and middle class and charming. They've never roughhoused him as much as they have done Nigel. So he's just, you know, he's perhaps not as savvy in that regard. Very, very bright man. Very bright man. And a good man. I mean, I just want to say this about Richard. If anyone out there's gone, I don't like Richard Tice anymore. He's one of the most incredible, humble people I've ever met. When the Brexit Party finished, he put it on ice. The name had already been changed to Reform, but he put time and energy and money into that to keep it alive and ticking over. Just a shell of a thing. But he kept it alive. And he always wanted Nigel to come back. It's what he wanted. Often I was used as the interlocutor. Have you spoken to Nigel? Do you know where he's at? Do you know if he's thinking of coming back? And it was a given that when Nigel comes back, it's his party. And not just his party in terms of he becomes leader, but Nigel is a leader in every sense of the word. He really manages. He becomes the sort of the king And Richard wanted that. That man put energy and time and money into keeping that party alive, knowing that the one who's going to take home the accolades, the one who's going to have the worship, the one who's going to be in the history books will be Nigel. Show me a man able to do that. Very few people have that sort of humility, generosity, and pragmatism. That very few people have that, and Richard has it in abundance.
Final couple of things. What does the future hold for you? And also, if you were Prime Minister, how would you change the country? How would you like the UK to become?
No one knows what the future holds.
What do you want it to hold? What are you striving for?
I'd like to get married and have children, actually, if I'm honest.
Good on you. Time's
ticking on. And I'm afraid that's kind of out of my hands, because you need a willing partner on the other side who's on board with that. I'm always going to, in my life, be committed to engaging with what happens with this country. I have done, my whole career's been about that. Like I said, I walked out of the BBC before I'd even done 6 months there to go and work for UKIP when they were still an unknown. So I've known that is my raison d'etre for a long time. How that manifests, whether it's broadcast, whether it's politics, I don't know. I have a feeling, given the way that broadcasting is going, it's going to be politics. And so, yeah, that's where I'd like it to go, in that direction. You know, rather than just talk about it like I'm doing right now, do it. So let's see what fate has in store, what he has in store for me, because it's, you know, will be his agenda really that I fulfill. If I was Prime Minister, I just think that what's needed is guts and conviction. I think for too long there's been a reticence to doing what's necessary. And actually a sort of brutal sense of honesty and leadership. Because politicians now, because they're all from the finishing school of the sort of tugging the forelock, they're all from the professional classes, really. You don't really have people who have lived an unsheltered life and therefore have an unhindered vision. So I would hope that if I end up at any point in any ways of the workings of the state, that I would just be a champion for conviction and actually having a vision, rather than just day by day managing a situation, hoping that somehow it's all going to work out, but treading the fine line because you don't want to upset the apple cart or risk your own seat. Or, you know, in this game, you've got to be risk averse, really, or there's no point playing.
And what does the ideal Britain look like for you?
It looks like a country that is able to unite about things because people are setting these in stone. You know, since King Charles came to the throne, we haven't had trestle tables out for a thing for a while. I kind of want that. That's what we do. You know, I don't know, it's probably not due a jubilee or something, but can you come up with some fucking reason why we can all get out trestle tables and make soggy sandwiches again? Because I like that stuff. People might think it's silly and unimportant, but actually it's not. These little markers are quite important. Throw an extra bank holiday into the mix. Stop talking down the country. DEI gone. This stuff is toxic. It's harmful. That's banned. I don't want any of that. Don't want any of this sort of corrupt, horrible, divisive, narrative about seeing everything through the prism of race. That's banned. That's gone. Woke, gone. It's evil. It's failed. It's made us divided as society.
Woke feeds racism, I think.
Yeah, it does. And do you know what? If you took that shit out, you'd actually find that a lot of people from a lot of cultures rubbed along a lot better. And when people came here, they'd want to integrate because they had something to buy into. You can't say people are coming to Britain, not integrating, not buying into the concept of Britain, when the concept of Britain is being kicked in the bollocks and thrown to the dogs. Like, what do you want people to be buying into then? So that's got to come back. And I'm a big believer in positivity, building positively for the future, not going, oh, this is terrible, no, I'm an optimistic person. So I want to see, we need to boost the economy enormously. We need to go down the sort of Javier Milei route of taking the chainsaw to all of the crap and the sort of, dead weeds that tangle up business and industry in this country. It's got to go. And then just a sense of optimism and not be afraid to bring back old-fashioned values and teachings. Schools should have school assemblies. School assemblies should be built upon Christianity. I'm not saying everyone's got to go to church and believe, but I'm afraid this is a Christian country, and that is why we thrived. That is why we thrived throughout history. One religion has brought the progress. One. Vaccines, internet, computers, electricity, you bloody name it, ending slavery, whatever you want to look at. One religion largely has been the big engine behind so much human and societal progress. And let's not forget that, and let's not be ashamed of that, and let's make that at the basis once more of how we think about ourselves and how we want to build our country going forward. I think that is, like I said, his hand's on my shoulder, and I feel like I, in many respects, am trying to do his bidding, maybe not brilliantly. But that's always going to be a motivating factor for me.
And as an atheist, I completely agree with everything you've just said. Bring back Christian values, restore them in the UK for goodness sake. And before we wrap this up, anything you want to say?
Be part of the change you want to see. That is actually being part of, say, the teachings of, I hate to bring it back to Christianity, but I'm going to. I don't hate to, I like it, but people might not. I'm going to bring it back to that, which is the messages of Christianity are tolerance, kindness, thinking and acting in a way that embraces other people, whoever they are. That's important. It's also a message of conviction and courage, because a man knew he was going to be nailed to a cross, and he stood up for values anyway. So my message is to anybody listening, if you want change, you've got to be part of it. And that is in everything you do in life. But do it with the decency of a Brit.
And that's that. Well, Alex, it's been a joy, and thank you for your honesty and your words of reassurance to the British public.
Oh, I loved it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liam.